Hey, this is Corbett here with Turtle Anarchy Brewing Company. Just giving you some hype videos to get you ready for Adventure Science Center's Science of Beer around the world in 80 brews happening December 14th, 2017. This is going to be a 5-part mini-series where I answer some of your questions. The first question comes in from Molly, and Molly asks, how do craft brewers choose what flavors or ingredients to use in their beers? Ultimately, what we do as brewers kind of depends on the type of brew that we want to make, but it comes down to 4 basic ingredients. The first of which is the malt, second, the hops, third, yeast, and fourth, sometimes we'll even play around with the water a little bit. For starters, we're going to look at our malts. Here I have 3 different types of malts. I have our base malt, which is going to be mostly the food for the yeast to eat. Although there are some variations in the grain and the different minerals where the malt's made, your base malt is typically going to be used just for food for the yeast. The second malt that we'll use is going to be a crystallized malt. This crystallized malt has been kilned in such a way that the sugars on the outside create this delicate sugar shell, almost like a Cracker Jack. A lot of your crystal malts are going to have a caramel kind of flavor to it. Those caramel flavors can't be digested by the yeast during fermentation, and those sugars are going to be left behind for the consumer to experience when they drink the beer. Finally, the third type of malt that's typically used, if we were to break it up into large categories, is going to be a roasted malt. Now, your roasted malts, whenever you try them raw rather, are going to have kind of like a coffee bean-esque kind of flavor to it. It's got a very, very strong roast flavor. With this roasted malt, you're going to get more of the roasty flavors, the chocolate flavors, a lot more of the deeper coffee-esque kind of flavors. So depending on the balance of these 3, different percentages here and there, that's going to kind of dictate majority of the flavor that comes out in your beer. Second is hops. We at Turtle Anarchy use hop pellets, much like probably most of the other breweries here in the area. You can also use whole hop cones, which kind of look like little mini green pine cones, if you will. And they range from bittering hops to aromatic and flavorful, citrus flavored, earthy, spicy, all sorts of different types of flavors that can come in with your hops. Third, and we'll probably jump into this a little bit more in our next session, is going to be yeast. Depending on what temperature you ferment your yeast at, or the different strain of yeast is really going to influence the phenols or esters or fusel alcohols that you taste with your beer. The colder you ferment at, the cleaner and more crisp flavor you're going to have. The warmer that you get, it's almost like a it allows the yeast to act a lot more wild and freely, and you get a lot more off flavors, and sometimes these off flavors will just develop into a beautiful masterpiece of a beer. Finally, and to keep this a little brief, is going to be the water. What makes Turtle Anarchy's stout different from a Guinness Extra Stout, different from a stout from Singapore, has to do with the mineral content in the water. Here in the Middle Tennessee area, we are super lucky to live in a very unique ecosystem called the Cedar Glades. The Cedar Glades are basically described as little sheets of limestone that make the soil pretty hard to dig into sometimes, but in other areas it can go down for miles. With this very unique limestone, very mineral-rich flavor or mineral profile that we have here in the area, it makes our beers taste very, very different from, say, Singapore's or Guinness or things like that. The more chlorides that you can find in your water, the maltier or softer the beer is going to taste. The more sulfates you have, the more hoppy characteristics are going to shine through. It's going to be a lot more sharp, a lot more crisp, allowing your beer to have a very clean finish, like in and out. And then using all of that info, we'll compile it, figure out what we want to make, knowledge of what we're aiming for, and then we'll choose our percentages of malts and different types of hops and water profile and what kind of yeast do we want to use. And with that, that's more or less how we make beers with the different knowledge of malt, hops, yeast, and water. We will brew some of our beers. I hope that answers your question. If you have any other questions, feel free to stop by our booth over at Adventure Science Center's Science of Beer Around the World in 80 Brews, happening on December 14th. Hope to see you there. Cheers.